We hear a lot about failing public schools, where they just don't have they're not meeting the academic standards of the state, where they're just, kids are not performing at the levels that they should be performing. And these become patterns often that are almost seem systemic, and it's like there's no correction there, and it goes on year after year after year. And one of the big concerns many parents have is they want their child to be in an environment where they're going to flourish, where they are going to excel in their ability to learn, ability to achieve. And if they're in an environment where it just is not performing up to even minimum standard levels often, that states have, um, but they don't seem to have any other option, go someplace else. uh, Here's, the solution we often see, or the request of traditional public education is, give us more money and we'll fix the problems. However, history shows us we give more money and the problems don't get fixed, because the issue is not really about money. The issue is about leadership and governance and accountability, and you know those fundamental foundational things that are so much a part of a school. The difference really then between a traditional public school and a public charter school, as you were mentioning earlier, is that these schools are constantly up for review. In most cases, it's about every 5 years. And if they do not maintain the standards that are set and the standards that they agree to in order to get their charter, they go out of business, right? And they have to maintain or exceed, they have to improve in order to continue to be in business and to be able to continue to access those public dollars in order to take those students and educate them. And so I think that is, really a big factor there. And that's why a lot of times you see those schools, the motivations perhaps are different, because they have to perform, they have to have connection with the parents and the teachers and the community in order to flourish, where traditional public schools really do not. They happen because they are. And that's not ultimately what's best for kids. And I think we all know that. But, it also requires then, uh, you know, when kids can go out of those systems that are not functioning well and have options, it's not a good look. And so I think that's where a lot of times the objections come. And of course, a lot of things are spoken to as for why, but at the end of the day, it's about performance. So, Nina, we got parents out there, and maybe they'd love to have their child in a public charter school. uh, Talk to them about, if there's a public charter school in their area. you know I know it's going to be different a little bit, but generally speaking, how could they try to get their kid in that school, first of all? If there aren't public charter schools in their community, or let's go a little wider, in their state, are there particular things that they may be able to do to help bring about those opportunities for them and for their community?
Melvin, thank you for asking me that question. And to your earlier point, yeah, that is one of the key differences between public and charter schools, in that our schools can and will be closed. And we are actually proud of the fact that if we're not performing well, or for whatever reason not held accountable, to the in terms of the terms of our charter, that we will be closed. In the traditional system, these schools often don't close, and some in here in Washington, D.C., a lot of them are operating at half the capacity, even though they are residing in these big, beautiful public buildings that were intended for students to be educated in it. So it's unfortunate that we spend so much money on some of our schools and there's no accountability attached to it. Some of it just has to do with governance, but a lot of it could be fixed if we reoriented our attention on the needs of students, which is exactly what charter schools do. To your question about how do you go about applying to a charter school, again, if you're new to a community, usually you can look at different websites. We have a website that has some of this information, but there are other consumer-facing websites that can give you a good profile of the schools in that community, including charter schools. These websites are greatschools.net and Niche. I'm sure there are other resources out there as well, but those are the national ones that I'm familiar with. And these websites tell you a lot about the school, about test scores, about how popular these schools are, based on feedback from families. But personally, as a mom, I have a high school senior now. The best thing for any family to do, regardless of the type of school that they're trying to enroll their child into, is to go visit the school and get a feel for, what's happening in the school, the quality of the instruction. Academics give you half of the information, but the feel of a school gives you the other half. Is it a joyful place? Do you see kids who are happy in the classroom, educators who are engaged in the classroom? I think watching some of those interactions gives you more information about the quality of a school than just looking at information on a website. But I also think, the test scores matter a great deal, as well as graduation rates and all those things. The other thing I'll say for a charter school, though, if they have more students than they have seats, they have to conduct a lottery. So you can't do, for those schools that are over enrolled, they can't just look at, they don't do first come, first serve. So, and that's really because we don't want these schools to be schools that are only catering to the most active and engaged families. And so in that sense, when we get criticized that these schools are creaming the best and brightest, we often bring them back to the importance of the lottery in making sure that the school is not selecting the kids, but that families are selecting them. And in a lot of communities, when they have huge wait lists, these schools have tried to expand. So unlike private schools that pride themselves in being small and only accepting a certain percentage of kids, our charter school leaders are trying to expand so that they can serve more families on those wait lists. And that is ultimately a very good thing.
So if parents find themselves, I know, parents, try hard to get their kid in a school like that and they don't make the lottery, and, sometimes it's a very tearful time. What action steps can they take? And maybe they don't even have a charter school in their community. What can they do? Who can they contact locally or outside of their area to try to get something started?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, that's a very good question. And I wish we had a more systemic way of capturing the names of those families who are looking for a charter school or a different kind of public school that it doesn't exist yet. But the first step is to, call your legislator and ask them, how do we make sure we can attract charter schools in this community? Looking at whether the state has a law, right? In some places you have a state law, but there's no charter in a community because the district is resisting it. So if you're an activist or someone who's likely or interested in doing more to bring a charter school, there are very strong active steps you can take. I also encourage those individuals to go to our website at publiccharters.org or to simply email me at nina@publiccharters.org in order to ask this very question. We're looking for engaged and active parents who are trying to open more schools or bring more charter schools in their communities. This doesn't mean they themselves have to go open one, but knowing if there's interest in a community, bringing other parents to the table to have this discussion is the first step in filing an application to open a school. And there are different ways of getting a school opened, and we're happy to help individuals in those places that have the opportunity or the option to open them.
One of the things that we are very big about is supporting parents. We believe that engaged parents are perhaps the most critical component to the education of any child. And so, we want to engage them, but we also have to give them the tools and the information so that they can work effectively. And that's why we ask the questions like that. Let me we've talked about some kind of narrow questions, but let me ask you a question now that just kind of goes back to you and your role in the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools. Here's the question. What does the National Alliance of Public Charter Schools do? And you, as their leader, obviously you're kind of the one that makes sure those things happen.
Thank you for asking that question. Our organization has been around for almost 20 years. We were conceptualized in 2004. Back then, charter schools were very popular. I was at the U.S. Department of Education at the time. There was a lot of momentum around opening them, around leveraging them as a tool to expand public school choice. But the reason the state association leaders in different states and other organizations that supported charter schools came together to create a national organization was, to be honest, over a fear that with all this attention and enthusiasm at the national level, that the sector and government officials would come up with a lot of one-size-fits-all solutions that would counter what the states and localities wanted for their schools. So the idea was to keep rules and regulations as far away from chartering as possible, and to do that in a coordinated way at the national level. So we do a couple of things. First of all, it's federal advocacy to make sure those rules stay as far away from us as possible. There's also a funding stream that was created with the support of a number of Republicans and Democrats, including then President Bill Clinton, the late Senator Durenberger from Minnesota, Congressman Frank Riggs from California, Dan Coates from Indiana, as well as Tim Romer, a Democrat from Minnesota. That pot of funding has grown over time. It's intended at growing the number of charter schools by simply offering funding for their launch and replication. It's probably the best federal program out there in a sense that it gives you the seed funding to do the early stage development of your school and then gets out of the way once you're fully operating. At the state level, our focus back then was to make sure we had more charter school laws, and that the laws that were being created were learning from some of the mistakes that had happened in the early stages of laws being created. So we have a model law. We rank states against that model law so that legislators have tools in order to draft and pass legislation. We gather information where are charter schools, how many different types, to your question of the diversity. We know how many students they serve, what demographics of students, where they're located, and all that good information. But as the sector has grown and matured, there are other issues that have popped up. So legally speaking, there are usually, so our opposition fights us on 4 different fronts. They fight us legislatively, although after you pass a law, eliminating it is not as easy. So to the extent they're fighting legislatively, they use language to weaken that law. So legislatures are one of the places where our opposition is active in. The second place they're active in is in the court of public opinion, social media, trying to promote some of the myths that you talked about earlier. And that can be quite damaging, especially in those places where knowledge of charter schools is not high. The third place is legal. They have used legal strategies, although none of those strategies have been successful in going after charter schools. I can certainly cite some of the examples, but so far the legal strategy hasn't stuck. And then the last piece is through active unionization of charter schools. Again, if a school wants to form a union and the teachers of those schools are interested in unionizing, they certainly have the power to do that. But we do have an objection with the unions actively trying to unionize charter schools, because one of the key things in the charter bargain is the ability to hire the best and the brightest, to make sure you're paying them more. And all the things that you do in order to make yourself more attractive to teachers will be taken away when you have a one-size-fits-all bargaining agreement with a big union in a big district. So those are the four strategies that are used to weaken us, and we are constantly monitoring what's happening and how to help the field in keeping some of this opposition at bay. I also like to just remind people that, when you think about reforms, our public education system is very, over time, reforms haven't stuck very well to the system because it's prone to just keeping the status quo. Chartering has outlasted a lot of these things, and it's not one of those things that can be eliminated now after 30 years with 3.7 million families and them 7,700 public charter schools. This reform is here to stay, and the reason the opposition is more vocal and more coordinated than ever is because we have been successful. So the pain points we're confronting is a sign of our success. And I think it proves that we have had an impact on student achievement and on, doing something that's different from the traditional system, which is why it's responding the way it's responding.
Thank you for that very thorough response and very informative. It's interesting, this issue, obviously, education is a state-focused area. Every state has their own specific laws and processes. And, there are some states where charter education is absolutely flourishing. And, that's a very rapid growth area for them. And they're finding lots of success. Other states, it's pretty well locked down. In fact, some states where it's not even allowed by law. And so, I'm sure on your website, some of that information would be available. And so let me just ask this kind of as we're kind of gearing toward a wrap up here. There may have been some specific question or a question you really wish I would have asked, or something that's just burning on you that you would love to share to help inform the public out there, particularly parents, but not only parents, but educators, legislators, people who really care about our communities and most of all our children. Is there anything specific you want to say?
Yes. Look, when you look at the gap in achievement between the rich and the poor and between minorities and whites in this country, it has always been wide. And during COVID, it became even wider. So a lot of the discussions we're having right now in the public domain is centered around how do we close that gap. But there is another factor that's going to accentuate that gap, which is how technology is disrupting the jobs of the future. That's happening faster than we ever thought it would happen. And every conversation I'm now involved in, whenever I go to a conference, has to do with that. I was just at the National Governors Association winter meeting, and there was one big panel just about that topic. So mental health and workforce readiness were the two topics that the nation's governors were talking about. And so when you think about that, it is more important than ever before for us to really pay attention to what we're teaching with a devotion to making sure that all kids can learn and can be ready for whatever challenge comes into the future. So the schools we're creating today are no longer going to be schools that are just teaching kids how to read and write, but also schools that are building character, that they're making our students curious about creating their jobs, right? Not just going into a job that's going to likely be disrupted. So the critical thinking skills and character building skills are becoming more and more important. And we need more individuals in our public school system who are helping us think through this. What chartering does, in effect, is bring new individuals to help us solve this puzzle. Individuals who have the mindset that all kids can learn. Individuals who haven't been in the system so long that they're somewhat jaded with some of the issues that are coming up. So that energy is really important to keep ourselves accountable for what we're here to do, which is ultimately serving the needs of kids. And so to anyone who doesn't know what a charter school is, I encourage them to go visit a school. I'm here in DC. We have so many of them. Again, this is a national audience. But if you're a skeptic, go visit a school, meet with the principal, go visit the classrooms. I have never gone to a charter school that I've left thinking this is not a good school. Every charter is going to be different. We don't have a one size fits all model, but the leaders of our schools are those individuals that you want to get to know better because they're in it in order to save and to solve some of the problems that I'm talking about. And the other thing I'll say from a parent standpoint, as I said, 3.7 million families are now in charter schools. The families who are sending their kids to these schools are ultimately the biggest and greatest line of defense when it comes to protecting and expanding charter schools. Their stories is what matters the most. And so one of the things I also encourage people to do is to go talk to these families, because people don't make decisions about where to send their kids to school, in a random way. It's usually a very personal matter. You don't just pick up your child and move them from one school to another because you felt like it. It's not like a restaurant option. You make those decisions when you're really frustrated or you're really seeking something that's better. And so understanding what's motivating families, leveraging and harnessing that power to have a broader impact on the way we do education in this country is really important, because ours is very different from the systems in other places that are more one size fits all, command and control. We need new energy. We need new people who are starting schools. We need individuals who are telling the story, because ultimately this is not about one sector over another. This is about how do we prepare our kids for what's coming ahead. And to me, the world of tomorrow is very different from the world that I grew up in. And we owe it to our kids to better prepare them and to put more effort and energy into what we're doing and how we're doing it, instead of just admiring the problem before us.
Very well said. I want to just throw a couple thoughts back out here just as a response to what you're saying. I couldn't agree more with the reality that one of the primary responsibilities that educators have is to prepare children, prepare students for a world that we can only estimate is going to be there. We have to make calculated estimates of what's going to be out there 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the road. And particularly, the next 10 to 20 years with job readiness, things that the Governor's Association was critical in knowing about, the whole, mental health issues. These are all critical issues. And so often, I think these issues are being approached really with an agenda-based focus rather than what really is unleashing and creating freedom and empowerment to our students. And you said it's important for us not just to teach them to read and write, but to prepare them so that they can achieve in all those areas. I couldn't agree more. But I guarantee you there are a whole lot of parents out there who would respond this way. I'd be happy for my kids to even learn how to read and write and do basic math. I mean, because if they don't get those foundational things, they're not going to get any of the rest of it. And so I agree with what you said. And I know you also, you didn't say it, but I know that you also understand the importance of those foundational concepts to all of the rest of it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for your time today. It's been very interesting. Nina Rees, the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. And as we go out, I just want to say this to parents, particularly parents. Look, we are blessed today with all kinds of options for education, probably more than ever before in our national history. Please don't settle for just what you know about. Look for better options for your kids. Get engaged, do a little research, find out, because there are public schools, there are private schools, there's homeschooling options, there's the public charter school options. There are many, many, many options. Not every option is good for your child, but you owe it to your child to find out what options are out there that are going to fit your child and help them to flourish. I know every parent out there wants to do that. We encourage you to do it. If there's anything we can do to help you at Noah Webster Educational Foundation, any of the resources we have, or if you want to contact us, please do so, nwef.org, or certainly also feel free to reach out to Nina and her organization if you want to learn more about charter schools. Nina, would you give us that website again?
Publiccharters.org is our website. Our Twitter handle is at Charter Alliance. That handle also works for our Instagram page if you are on Instagram.
Okay, very good. Well, Nina, thank you for taking time to talk to us today to help educate those who are listening. To all of you, we hope this session was informative and useful to you. God bless you.
Thank you so much.